If you go back to 1955, which is a long way back, Francis Durbridge wrote a thriller serial every year, and it was the top viewing every year. And I happened to be in two of them. I was in, the first one I did was in 1955, and it was called My Friend Charles. And then I did another one about 10 years later with Jack Hedley called The World of Tim Fraser, which was a 13-episode job. And oddly enough, when I was doing that, I had lunch with Francis one day. And he said, I'm thinking of trying to get Paul Temple done on television. And you're the man I'd like to play him. Now, this was years before Paul Temple was actually done. So when it came to the point, and the producer was casting around for someone to play it, I think Francis must have put in a word for me. So I just went to meet them, meet Francis and the producer and the head of drama at the BBC. And they offered me the part then and there, which was very lucky for me. I was very fond of Francis Durbridge. He was a Yorkshireman like me, and he was very bluff. And he used to say, well, I'll be quite honest with you, Francis, I don't think it's coming off very well. I wish they'd let me do something. But of course, they didn't allow him to write them. Well, he did. He wasn't so much that, but he couldn't write in that genre. He couldn't write one-off thrillers. He depended for his skills on the cliffhanger, because his television series, nobody will remember them now. It's such a shame, because they were brilliantly riveting, and every week you wanted to know what on earth's going to happen next week. Oddly enough, I very rarely listened to Paul Temple on the radio. I didn't base my character at all on anything then, because when I was offered the part, it was 1969, and so it was a very different era and very different values. And he had to be up to date at the time. He's very old-fashioned now, but then he had to be up to date. Now, the actual feel of the series, the shape of it, the sight of it, and the looks of it, Ross and I, more or less, made our own decisions about it. But Ross liked to use designer clothes. She had a very slim figure, and so she would have them all made for her, and they were very expensive. Mine, on the other hand, were nearly all off the peg. I would go to Cecil G's, was the shop that I went to. It was in King's Road, where we rehearsed. We used to wear scarves, you know, coloured scarves. You know, the roll necks and the smart, neat sports jackets and flannels. And I designed my own dinner jacket. It does look a little archaic now, but then it was very stylish. And Roger, my old friend Roger Moore, when he did a series with Tony Curtis soon after that, he did exactly as he copied the style. And he told me he did. There were two that were particularly good for me. One of them I made with my wife, Angela Brown, and we made that all on film in Malta and Gozo. And it was all made on location, and that I loved, because I had my two little boys with me. I had brand new children then. We had a great time, and I had a lot of friends in it. Murray Watson, who was a great friend and still is, he was in it. The episode Death of Fasching is an interesting one. It was set during the big annual Munich festival of Fasching. We walked down some steps in the middle of this huge crowd where they were all raving mad, drinking and shouting and blowing trumpets, and that was the real thing. We actually shot it. They hid the camera and they just said, just walk down. And later on they moved us to a side room and did some stuff. But it was all done at the time of Fasching. And they did it deliberately to help sell it to the Germans, you know, because it's a very famous thing in Germany. And there was another one which I thought was a splendid one, because it was like Durbridge. There was a German one, which I think the BBC have destroyed it along with most of the others, which was a two-parter. So that at the end of the first part, Paul Temple, the hero, pulled out a gun and shot somebody, a German count or something. And that was the cliffhanger. You wonder, and then the titles came out and you thought, Paul Temple has just killed somebody, what's going to happen? And that was wonderful, because next week it was revealed what had really happened, you know, and I was using blanks, and it was set up by me in the count. No, it was all, but it was that was very good. And there were one or two others, but there was one called Q Murder, which takes place all in a television studio, in an interview program, in a sort of people talking about murder plots. And that was very clever because we actually had an invited audience, a huge invited audience, as if we were doing the David Frost show or something. And they were actually told when they came that they were coming to see a television program about murder. And when they got there, they saw that it was me, you see. And they had to be told that you are the audience, but this is a story, it's not a real. So that was fascinating to do. And lovely actors in it as well. They were a lovely gang. That was the lovely thing about Temple. I met all my friends all the time. And I never had time to talk to them, of course. I unfortunately wasn't able to take any part in suggestions for the writing because, although I have to say, at this stage, it's all right for me to say that I did complain quite a little about some of the writing. Some of the writing was very flaccid and not very exciting. And I longed to do action. I thought that he was too charming and too bland. And I got complaints like this from audiences who at the time were watching Callan. You know, and he was a real action man. He also wore a dirty raincoat and talked like that, you know. It was 69 and everybody thought that it should be more, you know, active and more like American series with lots of car chases and banging and shooting. And we did get some more of that into it later, and I had several great fights. And I enjoyed those because I liked doing that. I'd done it all in horror movies and things, doing all my own stunts. And I longed to do that. But I did make I stuck my heels in at one point, well, over and over again until they decided to change it. And that was the title sequence. There was after the first few episodes, which had a lovely, interesting design title sequence, out of the blue, the next episode that I did had some idiot just running all the way down. It was actually done in the underground park at Hyde Park. And there's an underground car park there which has an endless corridor. And they had stuck a camera and let him run, and they'd followed him with a zoom. And it wasn't me. I don't know who it was. But it had this terrible jangling version of the title music. It was a really tatty, I hated it. And eventually I persuaded them to change it, and Derek Sherwin very kindly shot with me in my dinner jacket a split screen version where there's a split screen and then the screen comes together and it's me and I turn and walk out. Looked much more, and they made a smooth version of the music, which was more to the point, I thought. It was the style that I thought was missing out on things like that. The fact that we did so many episodes abroad was a great pleasure for me because I realized that it was being stretched. It wasn't just in the home counties. It was going to be international. And it was done because they wanted to sell the series to all these countries. And so in order to do that, they needed some episodes done in them. But the trouble with that was, with all the filming I did abroad, it curtailed my rehearsal time for the actual studio stuff. I had 10 days between doing one show and recording the next show. And in that 10 days, I would be whipped by an aeroplane to some foreign clime and do 2 or 3 days on location. By the time I came back, all the other actors had learnt the stuff and they'd rehearsed it all with my stand-in. And I had to just slot myself in and learn 80 pages a week. You know, it was an enormously hard job, very, very hard. And because of that, I didn't have time to enjoy the locations. But it was, it added to the value of the series enormously. It helped its international sales. Yeah. We did 52 episodes in 2 years. That's 26 episodes a year, which is literally every 10 days. And nobody else had done it before, and nobody else has ever done it since. Such continuous work, non-stop. But we did get a break every year of 1 month. We had a month off. I was a busy lad, and I couldn't grumble because actors want to be busy. I mean, they want, you know, they want to make money and they want to work. I don't think we would ever have spread the series out in such a marvellous way if it hadn't been for Niels Nielsen, who was the head of Taurus Films. And he came to the BBC after the first few episodes and said, we can't have this. We can't have him driving that silly car. He's got to be in a Rolls Royce or a Bugatti or something, as he is in the radio. And he's got to come abroad and film them abroad so that we will, you know. And it was they who really pressed for a bigger, a more international looking atmosphere. And in Munich and Hamburg and places like that, their advertising for Paul Temple was stunning. I mean, they had huge posters in the middle of the city, gigantic posters, saying, you know, Paul Temple every Tuesday night, and it gave the time. Big photographs of me all over the city because they believed it was their biggest money spinner. And without them, I don't think that would have happened, because the BBC then were, it's changed now because they try to sell stuff all over the world, but then they were quite different. Well, I could tell you what Hugh Weldon said to me, you know, when I'd finished the series. I'd finished the series and, you know, 52 episodes, and they'd stopped it. We were going to do 5 years, and they decided they didn't want to have anything more to do with it. That was the BBC. They didn't want, I mean, Taurus wanted to go on and on because it was making them a fortune. Eric Morecambe kept asking me all the time I was doing it, because we were next door to each other a lot. When are you going to come and do our show for us? And when I'd finished, I immediately went, that October, I went straight into a show with Eric and Ernie. And I was having lunch with him. Hugh Weldon came to sit over with us, and I'd never met him. He was the head of the BBC, and he's never spoken to me. He never had anything to do with me, because Hugh Weldon was in charge of the arts. You know, it was all very highly esoteric, the arts. And he sat down, and he said, yeah, pity we had to shelve Temple. I had to cut Temple out. I said, yes, never mind. He said, well, it's the bloody Germans, you know. They want to take over, and they're making us too commercial. This is not what we should be doing. We should be doing the Elizabeths with Glenda Jackson. We should be doing Henry VIII and things like that. This is low-grade territory, he called it. And it's sailing, his actual phrase, I've never forgotten, he said, I think it's sailing far too close to the charter winds. And he meant the BBC doesn't do successful stuff. The BBC does esoteric stuff, which was right. I mean, to a certain extent, I agreed with him. But I said, aren't you happy? It's got 25 million viewers every Tuesday night in Germany. And it's all over Europe. He said, no, it's not our sort of stuff. So I can say that life was pretty difficult, well, wonderful for me, because I was making a decent living, and I was very well known suddenly. I was very famous in England and in Germany and all abroad. But it did make problems with the family, because my wife took to walking miles behind me if we went shopping or anything. You were constantly pestered. But then that's the lot of an actor who becomes very much high profile. It's what you have to put up with. And it went on for a long time after Temple. It went on and on because it was so stuck in the public's mind. I'm going to be very curious about how the public reacts to this issue of the DVDs, because although we did so many and they were so popular, the BBC never ever repeated a single episode of 52. It was never shown again. It took a place in the BBC's archives of something they didn't want to know about. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. It's a strange genre altogether, and it was old-fashioned. Well, the Americans did some afterwards. You know, they did Heart to Heart, and they did Macmillan and Wife. So they copied the genre because they wouldn't buy Temple. It was too English, much too English.